Welcome back to the Vault of the North. This is episode 3, First Rule. In our last episode, Tony sealed the Scottish vault and faced the cost of opening it. Now, as he tries to escape the moor, he discovers that the consequences of what he did are only beginning. The world has noticed him, and so have the people who want what he carries. Chapter 1, The Road That Notices You. The hill looked ordinary again. That was the cruelest part. From a distance, it was only grass and stone, wind combing the heather into rippling patterns. No seam, no mouth, no evidence that a door had ever existed there, let alone breathed. Tony stood with his back to it anyway, as if the land might change its mind the moment he turned around. His thumb throbbed, a shallow sting, steady and insistent. The cut was nothing, barely a nick, but it felt louder than it should, like the vault had rewritten what pain meant. And now his body was catching up. The air tasted like cold coins. He flexed his fingers. The consequence inside him stirred, not as a voice, not as a thought, as pressure. A weight shifting behind his ribs, settling into new territory. It didn't tell him what to do. It didn't have to. Tony could feel the world leaning toward him now, as if everything had been politely ignoring him before, and someone had just spoken his name in a quiet room. Across the moor, Eleanor and her people had vanished into the mist. The warden still stood on the distant ridge, tall and unmoving, a silhouette cut from judgment. It had not stopped her. It had not helped Tony. It had watched. That was what made his skin crawl. Not the predator, not Eleanor, not even the vault. The watching. Tony started walking, not fast, not slow. The same pace he'd used in London when he needed to cross a street at night and pretend he wasn't aware of the men behind him. The same pace he'd used in school corridors when carrying too much and not wanting questions. His backpack felt heavier than it had this morning. Not the weight, the meaning. Inside, the map, folded in its plastic sleeve. A cheap bottle of water. Snacks he didn't want. The pocket knife Liam had insisted on. The world's smallest first aid kit. Nothing that looked like a weapon. Tony didn't feel unarmed. He felt exposed. He crossed a rise and saw the road at last. A thin ribbon cutting through the open land. A bus stop sign leaned slightly, as if it was tired too. The wind slapped his face and tried to peel his hood back. He kept it up. He didn't want to be noticed. That thought hit like a bitter joke, because he already was. A small car passed. Slow, too slow. Tony didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched it with the corner of his eye. The driver's head turned slightly, the way people looked at something interesting without realizing they were doing it. Tony felt the look land, not recognition, not suspicion, notice. The car sped up and disappeared around the bend. Tony exhaled slowly, through his nose, the way he did when trying not to shake. "Okay?" he murmured. "Okay. That's fine." He hated how thin his voice sounded in the open air. A bus came 20 minutes later, rumbling into view like a decision. Its doors hissed open. The driver glanced at Tony, then looked again, eyebrows lifting for half a second. Tony stepped on, paid cash, sat near the back. The bus smelled of damp wool and diesel and old crisps. A woman in a fluorescent jacket sat near the front with a shopping bag on her lap. Two teenagers leaned into each other, whispering and laughing. Normal? Tony tried to let normal settle on him like a blanket. It didn't. The older man across the aisle did that thing again. The same as the driver. The double take. His eyes snagging on Tony as if Tony had suddenly become a headline. He looked away quickly, then looked back, as if checking whether Tony was still there. Tony's throat tightened. The custodian's warning replayed in his mind, calm as stone. Do not mistake being seen for being safe. Tony stared out the window at the passing moor. He could handle being watched by criminals. He could handle being watched by Eleanor. But being watched by ordinary people, without understanding why, that felt like the floor shifting under his entire life. His phone buzzed. No signal earlier. No service in the vault. Now the screen glowed with a message, like nothing had changed. Zara texted, "Tony, please answer. I'm getting weird messages." Tony swallowed, typed with cold thumbs. Tony typed, "Don't talk to anyone about the map. Anyone. Are you safe? Right now?" 3 dots appeared. Zara texted, "I'm in my room. Door locked. But someone came to the library today, asking questions." Tony's stomach dropped. Tony typed, "What kind of questions?" Zara texted, "About old symbols. About Edinburgh. About a boy with a map." He acted like it was a joke, but his eyes weren't joking. Tony squeezed the phone so hard his knuckles ached. Eleanor didn't just chase, she networked. She didn't need to find Tony every time. She could widen the net until the world tripped him. Tony typed, "Did you give him anything?" Zara texted, "No." I said I didn't know. He smiled, like that meant I did. Tony stared at the bus window. In the reflection, he saw his own eyes. Dark, tired, too old for 19. He thought of Maria in Acton, probably halfway through a shift, probably expecting him home later with some lie about revision and study groups. He imagined Eleanor's resources reaching London like a hand. Tony typed, "Zara, listen. If anyone contacts you again, you don't meet them. You don't just talk. You don't open your door unless you're 100% sure who it is. Promise me." Zara texted, "Tony, what is happening?" Tony's fingers hovered. He could tell her everything, could dump the whole impossible truth into her lap and hope she didn't drop it. But the vault had taught him something already. Opening was easier than closing. And truth, once opened, didn't always close neatly again. Tony typed, "I found something I shouldn't have. Now people think I'm a key to it." Zara texted, "A key?" Tony typed, "I'll explain later. Right now, keep your head down. You hear me?" A pause. Zara texted, "Okay. Tony, are you okay?" Tony looked out at the land again. The sky was a cold lid. The hills were wide, patient, ancient. "I'm alive," he whispered. Then he typed the closest thing to honesty. Tony typed, "I'm not alone anymore." He sent it, then switched the phone to airplane mode, not to hide from Zara, to hide from everything else. Because if Eleanor could text him, Eleanor could track him. He had no idea what she knew or what she could do. The bus dropped him in a small town that looked like it had been built to mind its own business. One main street, a pub with a faded sign, a shop selling everything from bread to batteries to fishing lures. A train station, so small it seemed embarrassed to exist. Tony stepped off and felt eyes land again. Quick, curious. A woman walking a dog glanced at him, as if she'd forgotten something, then turned back for a second look. Not hostile, just noticing. Tony pulled his hood tighter. He found a room above the pub, paid for 2 nights, asked no questions. The woman behind the bar gave him a key and looked him in the face a little longer than necessary. "You passing through?" she asked. Tony forced a neutral tone. "Yeah, where you from?" He wanted to say London, wanted to say Acton, wanted to say none of your business. Instead, South. She nodded slowly, as if filing it away. Tony climbed the stairs, unlocked his room, stepped inside, and locked the door behind him. Then he dragged the chair from the corner and wedged it under the handle. Only then did he breathe properly. The room was small. A bed, a sink, a narrow window looking out onto slate roofs. The air smelled faintly of cleaning spray and old beer. Tony dropped his backpack onto the bed like it was an animal he didn't trust. He sat beside it and stared. He could still feel the vault in his bones. Not the stone, not the cold, the rules. Rules clung to him now, like damp. He opened the bag and pulled out the map, unfolding it carefully across the bedspread. It had changed. Not dramatically. No new ink blazing across it. Something subtler. Where the Scottish vault marker had been, the symbol now looked closed. The earlier eye marking was gone, replaced by a thin ring, complete and unbroken. A sealed loop. Tony's chest loosened slightly. So he had closed something. But then he saw it. The faint pulsing elsewhere on the map. Not a glow exactly, but a slight darkening of ink, like a bruise forming under paper. Another place, another point. Not in Scotland. West. Wales. Maybe. Coastal. Tony's mouth went dry. No. He muttered, "No, no, no." The consequence inside him stirred again, confirming the direction, tugging his attention like a compass needle. It wasn't forcing him. It was reminding him. The network moves. The custodian had said it clearly. The map will continue. So long as you do. Tony rubbed his face with both hands. His palms felt rough. Work hands. Grave, cleaning hands. Not hero hands. He looked at the map again. "What do you want from me?" He asked the paper, like it might answer. It didn't, but the pressure inside him did. Tightening slightly until he stopped asking, Tony unfolded his cheap tourist map of Scotland on the bedside table and tried to be practical. Okay, step 1, protect Zara and Liam. Step 2, protect Maria. Step 3, stay alive. Step 4, figure out what the next vault point means without walking straight into a trap. He was on step 1 when the knock came. 3 taps, measured, not drunk, pub knock, not wrong room, sorry mate knock. A knock that meant the person on the other side expected the door to open. Tony froze. The consequence inside him cooled. Alert, not fear, focus. He stood, moved silently to the side of the door, and listened. A voice came through the wood. Calm, level, Antonio Reyes. "We would like to speak with you. You are not in trouble." Tony's blood went cold. They knew his full name. Not Tony, not mate, not you, there. Antonio Reyes. He swallowed. I don't talk to strangers, he said, hating the tremor he couldn't fully hide. A pause. Then, that is wise. Tony's jaw tightened. Who are you? Another pause. Longer, as if the person was choosing words carefully. Guardians, the voice said. Of a sort. Tony's pulse hammered. The keepers. He remembered the custodians. Carving. The man in the cemetery. The word it had spoken like a label nailed to the world. A keeper. Tony didn't open the door. You followed me, he said. Yes, the voice agreed. Not to take. To assess. Assessment over. Leave. A faint sound. Almost like a smile. We cannot. The voice replied. Not anymore. Tony shut his eyes. Why? Because the acquirers have escalated. And because something else has noticed you. Tony's throat tightened. The warden, he said. Silence. That silence wasn't hesitation. It was confirmation. Tony's fingers curled around the chair leg, ready to swing it, even though he knew that was ridiculous. What do you want? He asked, quietly. To keep you alive, the voice said, and to keep you unbought. Tony let out a short, sharp laugh. Bit late for that. We disagree. But you must decide whether we are allies. Tony stared at the door. Allies. He thought of Eleanor's offer, spoken like a transaction. Money, safety, mother, taken care of. He thought of the predator in the heather that had run toward her greed like it could smell it. He thought of the warden watching, unblinking. What's the catch? Tony asked. A pause. Obedience, the voice said. To rules. Not to us. Tony's stomach twisted. Rules. Again. Always rules. He breathed in through his nose, out through his mouth, the way he did to stop panic from running him. Then he moved the chair slowly. He opened the door. 2 people stood in the narrow hallway. A woman in her 40s, dark hair threaded with gray, wearing a plain coat and boots built for walking far. Beside her, a younger man, mid-20s maybe, eyes sharp, posture alert. Neither smiled. They weren't trying to be friendly. They were trying to be real. Hello, Tony, the woman said. My name is Ruth. Tony didn't offer his hand. Didn't step aside. Kept the threshold between them. Like it mattered. You're the keepers, he said. Yes. And the acquirers? Ruth's eyes hardened a fraction. Eleanor. Her people. Others? Tony nodded once. She texted me. That earned a glance from the younger man. Ruth didn't look surprised. She will. Tony stared at them both. How did you find me? Ruth's answer was simple. We followed the ripple. The ripple? The younger man spoke for the first time. When you opened the vault, the network stirred. People like Eleanor chase the map. We chase the disturbance. Tony's mouth went dry. So you're, what, vault police? Ruth's expression didn't change. We are not authority. Tony almost laughed, because I just met authority. It stood on a ridge and watched me. Ruth's gaze sharpened. You saw a warden? Tony nodded. Ruth exhaled slowly, as if that moved something from possibility into certainty. Then you're further in than most survive, she said. The words didn't feel like praise. They felt like a warning. Tony stepped back a fraction, still keeping the door half closed. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Ruth's voice softened slightly, not in warmth, but in precision. "We want you to understand this," she said. "The map chose you because you did not seek it." Tony's jaw clenched. "That doesn't feel like a blessing." "It isn't. It's a test." Tony looked down at his thumb. The small cut, the dried blood, and the cost? He asked. Ruth looked him in the eye. "You've already paid part of it," she said. Visibility. Tony's stomach tightened. "So you know, we know what it means. And we know what happens when someone like Eleanor tries to turn a test into property." Tony stared at her. The younger man's eyes flicked to the town window at the end of the hall, then back to Tony, as if his body was always reading exits. Tony didn't like that. People who moved like that expected trouble. "Come in," Tony said finally, voice tight, quick. "Then you leave." Ruth nodded. "Once." The younger man stepped in first, scanning the room in one fast sweep. Tony shut the door, wedged the chair back under the handle. Ruth didn't comment. That meant she understood. Tony sat on the edge of the bed with the map still spread out. Like a confession he hadn't had time to hide. Ruth's eyes went to it immediately, but she didn't touch it. Good. Tony didn't trust people who reached too fast. "What's your name?" Tony asked the younger man. He hesitated. "Callum." Tony nodded. "Right, Ruth. Callum. Explain." Ruth spoke like someone trained to say only what mattered. "The keepers exist to prevent vault collapse. Not to own vaults, not to open them, not to profit." Tony gave a humorless smile. "So, you're saints?" Ruth's eyes didn't soften. "No. We are people who have seen what happens when vaults are treated as prizes." Tony's gaze dropped to the map. "And what happens?" Callum answered, voice quieter. "Wars start. Families disappear. Whole regions destabilize. Not with explosions, with pressure. The world tilts." Tony felt cold slide under his ribs. "Probability," he murmured, thinking of fortune. "Systems." Ruth nodded. "Vaults are connected." "You already heard that inside." Tony's throat tightened. "How do you know what I heard?" Ruth didn't answer directly. "We watch patterns," she said. "Behaviors. We've been watching you since London." Tony's head snapped up. "Since the cemetery." "Yes." Tony's hands clenched. "So you let me take it." "We let you find it," Ruth corrected. "There's a difference." Tony laughed once. Bitter. "Feels like I'm the one paying for your experiment." Callum's jaw tightened. "You're alive." Tony shot him a look. "That's your argument." Ruth lifted a hand slightly, the gesture small but commanding. Callum fell silent. Ruth leaned forward. "This is what matters now," she said. "Eleanor believes you can be bought. She will not stop. And now that you have sealed the Scottish vault, she will try a new approach." Tony stared. "What approach?" Ruth's eyes flicked to Tony's thumb, then back to his face. "She will come for your trace," Ruth said. "Not the map." Tony's stomach dropped. "My trace." Callum nodded once. "Blood seal means you're an anchor. If she can't open vaults directly, she'll try to make you open them." Tony's mouth went dry. "That's not happening?" he said. Ruth didn't blink. "We hope so." Tony hated that phrasing. Hope. Like this was bigger than willpower. He looked down at the map again, at the faint pulsing in the west. "And this?" Tony asked. "This is another vault." Ruth's gaze sharpened. "Yes." Callum stepped closer, careful not to touch the paper. "Whales. That pattern." Tony's throat tightened. "I'm not ready," Tony admitted. Ruth's voice was quiet but firm. "The vaults don't care about readiness." Tony looked up sharply. Ruth continued. "They care about intent, restraint, choice." Tony swallowed. "So, what do you want me to do?" Ruth's answer came like a nail hammered into wood. "Stop thinking the first rule is advice." Tony frowned. "It's not." Callum spoke, eyes steady. "It's a warning. For everyone who thinks they can open something and walk away." Tony stared at him. Ruth nodded. "That rule isn't just about vault doors. It's about consequences. Everything." Tony's chest tightened. "I closed it." Ruth held his gaze. "You closed one door," she said. "Now you have to live with what opening did to you. And to the network." Tony's throat burned. He thought of the town downstairs, the woman at the bar, the double takes. He thought of the way his life had been built on being overlooked, and how now the world seemed to turn its head whenever he entered it. Visibility, a consequence that didn't end. Ruth stood. "We can't stay," she said. "Not here. Not long." Tony's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "You're the keepers. Aren't you meant to be good at hiding?" Callum's mouth tightened. "We are. That's why we leave." Tony felt a pulse of anger. "So you show up, scare me half to death, tell me I'm basically a walking key, then vanish again." Ruth looked at him, and for the first time, there was something like sympathy. Not soft, not pity, just understanding. "You move through the world like someone used to carrying things alone," she said. "I can see it in how you stand. That habit will get you killed now." Tony's jaw clenched. Ruth moved toward the door. "One more thing," Callum said, pausing. Tony looked at him. Callum's eyes were sharp, serious. "The first rule," he said. "It isn't warning you about doors." Tony waited. Callum met his eyes. "It's warning you about people. They will always try to reopen what you close, because they can't stand the idea that something powerful exists, and they don't own it." Tony's stomach twisted. Outside, somewhere below, a car door shut. Not loud, not dramatic, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like punctuation. The consequence inside Tony tightened, cold and alert. Ruth's head tilted slightly, listening. Callum's posture shifted. Tony's mouth went dry. Ruth didn't look frightened. She looked annoyed. "That'll be them," she said quietly. Tony's chest seized. "Them? Who?" Ruth looked at him. "The acquirers," she said. "Or someone worse." A knock came again. Not 3 taps. This time, just one. Heavy, polite, certain. A man's voice drifted through the door, warm as a salesman's handshake. "Antonio Reyes. We'd like to speak to you about an opportunity." Tony felt the room shrink around him. Ruth's gaze turned razor sharp. Callum's hand moved slightly toward his coat, not reaching for a weapon, but for something else. A device, maybe. Tony's pulse hammered because the voice had said the word that felt most dangerous of all: opportunity. And Tony knew with sick certainty that Eleanor had learned exactly how to hunt him. Not with threats, with offers. The knock didn't repeat. That made it worse. People who knocked once and waited weren't uncertain. They weren't nervous. They weren't hoping you'd open the door. They expected you to. Tony stood frozen, listening to his own heartbeat slam against the walls of the tiny room. The chair under the handle suddenly felt like a joke. Ruth's eyes flicked to Tony's phone on the bedside table, still face down, airplane mode. Then to the map. Callum didn't speak. He simply shifted his weight, placing himself between Tony and the door without making it obvious, like a human shield designed to look casual. The voice in the hallway stayed warm. "I know you're in there. No pressure. You don't have to open up right away. We can talk through the door." Tony swallowed. "Who are you?" A short pause. Then the voice answered, lightly amused. "Someone who appreciates hard work. Someone who appreciates a young man who doesn't fold under pressure." Tony's stomach tightened. That was too specific. It wasn't a random stranger. Ruth stepped closer to Tony and spoke quietly, barely moving her lips. "Don't confirm anything," she murmured. "Confirmation is an opening." In the hallway, the voice continued, calm and coaxing. "You don't have to be afraid. We're not here to hurt you." Callum's eyes narrowed. Tony's breath came shallow. Ruth lifted her voice just enough to carry through the door. "We're not interested." The voice paused. Then, company. Tony felt the weight of that word. Company. Not friends. Not family. Not allies. A corporate label for whoever had entered Tony's life. The voice in the hallway warmed further, like a salesman stepping into his best tone. "Listen. If you're with him, you already know this is bigger than him. Bigger than all of us. So, let's be adults and discuss terms." Ruth didn't answer. Tony clenched his fists. "Eleanor sent you," Tony said. Ruth's gaze snapped to him. In the hallway, a soft chuckle. "She didn't send me. Eleanor doesn't send. Eleanor deploys. I'm not deployed. I'm invited." Tony's skin prickled. Invited is desire. Allowance is judgment. The custodian's words echoed unpleasantly. Ruth's voice stayed flat. "Leave," the voice sighed. A practiced sound. "Okay, here's the truth. We don't want your map. We don't want to harm you. We want to help you." A pause. "Your mother's name is Maria Reyes." Tony went cold so fast, he felt dizzy. His vision sharpened, edges hardening. "Maria." Callum's hand moved, quick and controlled, to Tony's shoulder, gripping once. Not restraining, anchoring. Ruth's eyes turned dangerous. In the hallway, the voice continued gently, as if discussing weather. "Maria works too hard. 2 jobs, isn't it? She deserves rest. She deserves a better flat. She deserves to stop pretending everything is fine when it isn't." Tony's mouth went dry. He forced his voice out. "Don't talk about her." A pause. Then the voice answered, calm as ever. "I'm talking about her because you're doing this for her. That's not a sin. That's love. And love can be practical." Tony's hands shook. Ruth whispered, close to Tony's ear, "He wants you emotional. Don't give him your fear. Fear is a signal, not a command." Tony inhaled slowly, held it. Then let it out. He spoke through his teeth. What do you want? The voice brightened immediately, like someone hearing a door crack, a conversation. That's all. Terms. Boundaries. Fairness. Ruth's mouth tightened. Fairness? The voice sighed again. You know the world isn't fair. That's why people with power take control of it. To stabilize it, Tony felt something in him twist. Stabilize. That sounded like the Vault Network. Stolen language. Who are you? Tony asked again. This time, the voice answered with a name, like offering a business card. My name is Dr. Malcolm Vane. I consult for Eleanor's organization. I specialize in systems, networks, human behavior. Tony's skin crawled. Consult. Like this was just another problem to be solved. Ruth's tone remained flat. Leave. Malcolm Vane laughed softly. I can leave. But I can also wait. I can sit in the bar downstairs and drink tea until you come out. This town isn't large, Ruth. Tony's pulse jumped. He'd said her name. Ruth didn't flinch, but Tony saw the micro-shift in her eyes, the calculation. Callum's jaw tightened. How do you know her name? Tony demanded. Vane's voice stayed smooth. Because I've read the right files. We all do. You think Eleanor is reckless. She isn't. She prepares. Tony felt his stomach sink. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was a project. Vane continued, as if offering logic. Antonio, you've already proved you're exceptional. You did what most people fail to do. You opened, you closed. You kept your restraint. Tony's skin prickled. How do you know that? A pause. Then, because the world changes when a vault shifts, even slightly. You don't see the ripple, but people like me feel it. Tony's eyes flicked to the map on the bed, the faint pulsing, the bruise of ink. Ruth's voice sharpened. You're not a keeper. So stop pretending you can read the network. Vane chuckled. I'm not pretending. I'm adapting. That's what humans do when they find something larger than them. We learn. Tony's breath trembled. Ruth moved closer to the bed and subtly folded the map, sliding it into Tony's bag without making it dramatic. Callum watched the door, listening. Vane's voice lowered slightly, becoming intimate, as if speaking to Tony alone. Antonio, this isn't a threat. This is an offer. Eleanor can make your life easier. She can take your mother out of survival mode. She can give you room to breathe. Tony clenched his jaw. The words stabbed because they were true. Not the intention, not the morality, the fact. Maria was exhausted. Tony had seen it 1,000 times. The way she rubbed her wrists at the sink, the way she smiled through fatigue. He had wanted it to stop being so hard. The vault had shown him fortune and made it cruelly tempting. Vane's voice deepened. Persuasive. You don't have to choose power. You can choose security. You can choose stability. You can choose to stop being the boy who cleans the dead and start being the man who protects the living. Tony's hands curled into fists. Ruth's voice cut through, quiet and hard. That's enough. Vane paused. Then Ruth, I respect you. But let the boy decide. Tony's stomach twisted. Boy, he hated that word. Not because it was inaccurate, because it was strategically chosen. Ruth stepped forward and spoke through the door, voice like a blade. You're trespassing. Leave before you make this worse. Vane sighed again. as if Ruth was being unreasonable. Fine. But I'll leave you with one thought, Antonio. Tony didn't answer. Vane continued. Warm and patient. Everything you do from now on will have consequences. If you keep running, people around you get hurt. If you keep refusing help, your mother suffers. But if you work with Eleanor, we can contain the damage. Contain. He was stealing keeper language. Tony felt cold anger rise. Stop saying my mother's name, Tony said. A pause. Then Vane's voice softened. Maria, he said gently. Tony's blood surged hot, and the consequence inside him flared. Not pain, not heat, a cold pressure. Sudden, sharp. Tony staggered slightly as the feeling hit. For half a second, his senses blurred sideways. He felt dizzy, disoriented, as if the room had tilted. Then something clarified. He could sense something outside, not see. Sense. A pressure. Bodies arranged in space. 3 of them. One leaning casually against the wall in the alley, listening. 2 more in a car across the street. Engine off, watching the window. Tony grabbed the bedpost for balance. Callum noticed his expression. What? Tony swallowed. There are others. Outside. Ruth's jaw tightened. How many? Tony hesitated. He didn't know how he knew. The sensing left him nauseous, off balance, like his blood seal had momentarily hijacked his perception. 3, Tony said. I think. 1 alley. 2 in a car. Callum moved instantly, stepping to the window, peering through the curtain without exposing himself. He exhaled, once, controlled. He's right. Ruth's expression did not change, but something in her posture sharpened. She looked at Tony. That's new, she said. Tony's throat tightened. It's the consequence. It's warning me. But it hurts. Ruth's eyes flickered with something like grim recognition. Authority has costs, she said quietly, even the smallest kind. Outside, Vane's voice continued, as if he had all the time in the world. I'll go. I'll be reasonable. But Eleanor doesn't like wasted effort. Tony's hands shook. Ruth whispered to Callum, fast and quiet. Backstairs, Callum nodded. Tony blinked. Backstairs? Ruth looked at Tony. We leave, she said. Now, Tony's chest seized. But Ruth cut him off. You think this ends if you wait him out? It doesn't. He'll keep talking until you crack. And if you crack, you let him in. Tony swallowed hard. Ruth moved quickly, pulling on gloves like she'd done this before. Callum checked the room, then pulled a small device from his pocket. A dull black rectangle with no branding. He pressed it once. Tony felt a faint shift in the air, like static. What is that? Tony whispered. Scrambler, Callum said. Basic. Keeps their microphones useless. Tony stared. They have microphones? Callum's eyes stayed hard. They have money. Ruth moved to the sink and turned the tap on full. The sound filled the room, loud and ordinary. Then she leaned close to Tony, voice low. Listen to me. You are being hunted by people who don't need monsters to be dangerous. Tony's throat tightened. Ruth continued. They don't want to kill you. Not yet. They want to own your choices. They want to convince you that your freedom is selfish. Tony's jaw clenched. And the keepers? Tony asked. Ruth's eyes didn't soften. We want you alive. We want the network stable. But we will not lie to you, Tony. Tony's breath trembled. What won't you lie about? Ruth held his gaze. If you keep the map, she said, they will eventually come for your mother. Tony went cold. Not a metaphor. Not a warning. A fact. Tony's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ruth said it again. Slower, as if drilling it into him. They will come for Maria. Tony's vision blurred. He saw his mom in the kitchen, hands red from washing up. He saw her smile when she thought Tony wasn't looking. A tired little curve of love and pride. He saw Eleanor's calm eyes. He saw Vane's warm voice saying Maria like it belonged to him. Tony's hands shook. No, he whispered. Ruth's voice stayed hard. Then you don't go home. Not yet. And you don't call her. Not from your phone. Tony's stomach churned. I have to warn her. Ruth nodded once. Yes. But not loudly. Not in a way they can trace. Vane's voice rose again in the hallway, calm and pleasant. I'll count to 10. Not as a threat, as a courtesy. Then I'll leave you alone for today. Tony's blood ran cold. Today, as if tomorrow was guaranteed. Ruth grabbed Tony's backpack, shoved it into his hands. Backstairs, she repeated. Tony stared at her, panic rising. What about him? Ruth's eyes flashed. He's a door. We don't open him. Vane's voice began counting. 1. The tap ran. Tony's pulse pounded. 2. Callum moved to the door and pressed his ear to it. 3. Ruth spoke fast, controlled. When we leave, you do not run. Loud fear draws attention. Tony's throat tightened. He nodded. 4. Ruth pointed at Tony's thumb. That seal you did. That means something. It means you have an anchor in the network. Tony swallowed. I don't know how to use it. You will. But not today. Today you survive. 5. Callum opened the door a fraction and peered out, then shut it again, whispering, he's at the bottom of the stairs. Not in the hall. Tony blinked. So, he's lying. Ruth didn't look surprised. He's always lying, even when he tells the truth. 6. Ruth opened the room's back door. A narrow panel Tony hadn't even noticed, leading to a cramped stairwell. Cold air rushed in. Tony's lungs tightened. 7. Tony stepped toward the back stairs, every nerve screaming. 8. Ruth paused at the threshold and looked at Tony sharply. The moment you feel yourself leaning toward what he's offering, she said, you stop. That's how you close things early. 9. Callum went first, moving down the back stairs without sound. Tony followed. Ruth stayed at the doorway a beat longer, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. A coin. It looked old, worn, smooth, edges nicked. She held it between finger and thumb, like it mattered. 10. Vane's voice called, amused. All right then. I'm going. Ruth's expression didn't change. She pressed the coin against the door frame briefly. Tony felt a faint static, like a tiny storm contained in metal. Then Ruth stepped away and shut the back door quietly. They descended. The stairwell smelled of damp stone and old dust. Tony's breath came too loud. He tried to make it smaller. Do not run. Do not make fear loud. They reached the bottom, and emerged into a narrow alley behind the pub. Rain had started, light and needling. The town was quiet, but not asleep. Tony felt eyes anyway, not literal eyes, a sense of awareness sliding across the place like a searchlight. Callum moved first, leading them toward a side street. Ruth kept close to Tony, one hand hovering near his elbow without touching. They turned a corner. Tony froze. A black car sat half a street away. Engine off, tinted windows. Two men inside, faces blurred by glass. Tony's chest slammed. Callum's posture didn't change. He simply altered their angle, walking as if they belonged here. Ruth murmured, barely audible, "Don't look at them." Tony forced himself to keep his gaze forward, but the consequence inside him pressed cold against his ribs, pointing, not at the car, at the alley across the street. A man leaned casually there, pretending to smoke. His eyes weren't casual. They were fixed. Tony's thumb throbbed again, sharper this time, as if reminding him, "You are anchored. You are marked. You are findable." Callum spoke under his breath. "On my count, we turn left." Walk, no hesitation. Tony's mouth went dry. "What about the train station?" Ruth answered, "Not yet." Tony's stomach tightened. "Where then?" Ruth's eyes stayed forward. "A place where your visibility is noise. A place where being noticed doesn't matter." Tony frowned, not understanding. Then he heard the pub door open behind them. A voice, warm and pleasant, calling lightly, "Antonio." Tony's blood went cold. Vane hadn't left. He'd repositioned. Ruth did not turn. Callum did not run. They simply walked faster, controlled. Vane's voice drifted behind them, still warm. "Just remember. Eleanor's offer won't disappear." Tony's throat burned. Ruth murmured, "Razor sharp, that's the trap. He wants you to think the door is always open." Tony swallowed. "What if I?" Tony whispered, the thought slipping out before he could stop it. "What if I take it?" Ruth's hand finally touched his elbow. Firm, anchoring. Then she said, without softness, without mercy, "Then you become an acquirer." Tony's stomach twisted. "And what happens then?" Ruth's voice stayed flat. "Then you stop being tested and start being used." Tony felt sick. They reached the corner. Callum lifted a hand slightly. "One?" he murmured. They turned left. The black car didn't move yet. The man in the alley didn't follow yet. But Tony could feel something settle in the air behind them. A decision. A chase delayed, not canceled. The consequence inside him cooled, alert and patient, like it had all the time in the world. And Tony realized something terrifying. This wasn't the vault's danger. This was the human danger. Because the vault never begged. The vault never persuaded. The vault simply measured. But people? People offered. People smiled. People said your mother's name like it was kindness. And the worst part? Tony wanted to believe it, even knowing it was a lie. They kept walking. Town streets blurred into damp pavement and shuttered windows. The smell of rain on stone mixing with fryer grease from somewhere still open. The place was quiet, but not empty. A few people drifted outside the pub, a couple arguing softly near the shop, a dog nosing a bin. Normal. But Tony felt it now. Then noticing, heads turned, eyes snagged. Not long enough to be rude, long enough to register. Tony used to move through the world like a shadow people forgot. Now he moved through it like a match people couldn't help looking at. Ruth led them down a side road toward the train station, then angled away at the last moment. "You said not yet," Tony whispered. Ruth didn't slow. Not the front entrance. Callum glanced over his shoulder, then at Tony's face. "You feel it, don't you?" Callum murmured. Tony's throat tightened. "Feel what?" Callum didn't answer directly. He just tapped his own temple once, then looked ahead again. Ruth spoke quietly. Voice clipped, practical. "They'll assume you go to the station. So we don't." Tony's mouth went dry. "Where then?" Ruth nodded toward a row of houses behind the station. Older terrace homes with back gardens pressed tight together like secrets. A narrow lane ran between them, dark and wet. "A cut-through," Ruth said. They slipped into it. The lane smelled of damp brick, old leaves, and the faint metallic tang of rubbish bins. Tony's footsteps sounded too loud. He tried to soften them. He failed. His body wanted to run. His chest wanted to breathe louder. But he remembered Ruth's earlier words. Loud fear draws attention. Tony forced his breath down into his stomach and kept walking. Halfway down the lane, the consequence inside him tightened. Not panic, direction. Tony stopped so suddenly, Ruth nearly bumped him. Ruth turned. "What?" Tony stared ahead. The lane ended at a small gate, opening onto an empty service road behind the station. But Tony could sense something on that road. The same way he'd sensed the men outside the pub. A presence. A watcher. Not human. Not exactly. He didn't see it yet. He felt it like a cold fingertip brushing the back of his neck. Callum noticed Tony's expression and went still. "What do you sense?" Callum asked. Tony swallowed. His thumb throbbed. That shallow cut suddenly sharp. "Something is there," Tony whispered. "Not them. Not Eleanor's people." Ruth's face tightened. "Describe." Tony hated that he couldn't. "How do you describe a feeling that isn't yours?" "It's patient," Tony said. "Like it's waiting for me to step out." Ruth exhaled slowly, then nodded once. "Warden?" she asked. Tony's stomach dropped. "I don't know," Tony admitted, "but it feels official." Callum's jaw tightened. "That's not good." Ruth's voice stayed low and controlled. "Back," she said. They retreated a few steps, pressing themselves close to the brick wall as if it might hide them. Tony wanted to ask 100 questions. What is the warden here for? Why is it following him? Does it enforce rules on him? But he remembered how the warden had stood on the ridge, unmoving, uncaring, watching. It didn't chase. It witnessed. Ruth reached into her coat and pulled out the same old coin. She held it between her fingers and pressed it lightly against the brick wall. Tony felt a subtle shift in the air, like the world's volume lowering by one notch. "What is that?" Tony whispered. "An old agreement," Ruth said. "With the land?" Tony felt cold run under his ribs. The land itself can act as witness. And now Tony understood what that meant. Witness wasn't passive. Witness could cooperate or refuse. Ruth's coin stayed pressed to the brick. Callum leaned close to Tony, voice barely there. "This is what the first rule means," Callum said. The world itself stays open once it notices you. Tony's breath came shallow. I didn't ask for this, he whispered. Ruth's tone didn't soften. None of us did. They waited. Seconds stretched. Tony felt the presence outside the lane shift, almost like it had moved its attention elsewhere. Not gone, just redirected. Ruth removed the coin. The air returned to normal, and Tony realized he'd been holding his breath. Ruth nodded once. Now they moved again, carefully. When they reached the gate, Ruth pushed it open a fraction and looked out. Tony didn't see anything immediately, just the service road, a parked van, a closed side entrance to the station. But the consequence inside him stirred again, faint and satisfied, like a dog recognizing a familiar scent. Whatever had been waiting had stepped away. Not for mercy, for timing. They crossed the service road quickly and slipped into a narrow maintenance corridor that led into the station building. Tony didn't even know it existed. Ruth did. Of course she did. Inside, the station smelled of hot metal and old coffee. A few commuters stood at the far end, half asleep, scrolling phones. Noise, people, movement. Ruth had been right. Here, Tony's visibility became just another thread in a bigger fabric. But Tony still felt eyes. Not the casual eyes of commuters, the deliberate eyes. Callum scanned the platforms like someone reading a threat map. Ruth steered Tony toward a bench in a corner near a vending machine that hummed like an insect. Sit, she said. Tony sat. His legs shook, adrenaline making everything too sharp. Ruth took the backpack from Tony's lap and placed it between her feet, not opening it, just anchoring it. Callum stood a few steps away, casually turned to face the station entrance, hands in pockets, posture loose but ready. Tony stared at Ruth. What happens now? He asked. Ruth looked at him, and her voice became precise, almost clinical. Now you close something, she said. Tony frowned. What? Ruth's eyes flicked to Tony's phone. Your trace? In the human world, Tony's stomach tightened. Phones, Ruth said. Patterns. Calls. Social accounts. Your life leaves a trail. Tony swallowed. I can't just disappear. You can. Temporarily. Not forever. But long enough to move without being dragged. Tony's chest constricted. I have to warn my mom, he said, voice rough. I have to tell her someone is coming. Ruth nodded once. Yes. But not from your number. Tony's throat tightened. Then how? Callum spoke, without turning around. We have a line. Burner. Untraceable. If used correctly. Tony blinked. Correctly? Callum glanced back, expression hard. One call. No names, no details. Just enough to change behavior. Tony swallowed. Ruth leaned closer. You're going to hate this, she said flatly. But you cannot tell her everything. Tony's stomach churned. She's my mother, and she will try to come to you, Ruth said. She will try to protect you. That's what good mothers do. Tony's eyes burned. Ruth continued, voice steady. If she runs toward you, she runs toward them. Tony's jaw clenched until it hurt. So this was it. The first real cost. Not blood. Not pain. Separation. Tony looked down at his hands. You said you wouldn't lie, he said. We won't, Ruth replied. But we also won't let you make this worse for her. Tony looked up sharply. Stop making it sound like logic when it's cruelty. Ruth's eyes didn't blink. It isn't easy, she said. That's why. It's the test. Tony wanted to shout. He wanted to throw the map in the bin and go home and pretend none of this had happened. But he felt the map's weight, like a heartbeat, through the fabric of his bag. He felt the bruise of ink pulsing in Wales. He felt the consequence inside him, patient and cold, reminding him, there is more. Tony forced his voice steady. Fine, he said. Give me the burner. Ruth reached into her coat and slid a cheap phone across the bench. The kind you could buy at a corner shop. Tony picked it up, like it might bite. Callum spoke quietly from his post. Before you call, Callum said, remember what Vane did. Tony frowned. What? Callum's eyes stayed sharp. He used your mother as an opening. He named her. He described her. He turned love into leverage. Tony's throat tightened. Callum continued, don't do his job for him. Don't turn your mother into a door. Tony swallowed hard. Ruth nodded once. Exactly. Tony stared at the burner. Then he dialed. 1, ring. 2, 3. Maria answered, breathless, as if she'd stepped away from a busy room. Hello? Tony's chest cracked. He wanted to say Mum, so badly his throat hurt. Instead, he made his voice lower, different. Maria Reyes? He asked, hating himself. A pause. Yes, she said cautiously. Who is this? Tony swallowed. Someone helping your son, he said. Silence. The kind of silence where a mother's world stops. Then Maria's voice returned. Suddenly sharp, suddenly alive. Tony, she demanded. Where is he? Is he hurt? Tony's eyes burned. No, Tony said quickly. He's not hurt. Maria exhaled. A sound that contained prayer and relief and anger all at once. Put him on, she said. Tony clenched his jaw. I can't. Listen to me. For the next few days, you need to change your routine. Maria's voice went cold. What does that mean? Tony forced his breath steady. Go stay with someone. A friend, family, anyone. Don't tell anyone where. Don't post anything. Don't answer unknown numbers. If someone asks about Tony, you know nothing. Maria's breathing sharpened. What is happening? She demanded. Tell me the truth. Tony's fingers dug into the cheap phone. I can't, he said. But you have to trust this. Maria's voice rose. Fierce. My son does not disappear. He does not vanish and leave me in the dark. Put him on. Tony's vision blurred. He looked at Ruth. Ruth's face didn't soften, but her eyes held a quiet urgency. Don't. Tony's throat tightened. Maria, Tony said, using her name the way Vane had, and hating it. Maria went still. Tony continued, voice trembling. He's okay. But people are asking questions. People with money. If they talk to you, they will sound polite. They will sound helpful. Do not talk. Maria's breath shook. Tony, she said softly now, if this is you, say it. Tony's entire body screamed. He wanted to. He wanted to let the door open. Just this once. But he heard Ruth's warning, sharp as glass. If she runs toward you, she runs toward them. Tony forced the words out, voice breaking. I'm sorry, he said. Please, just do this. Maria inhaled, and Tony heard something in it. Faith, a small prayer, spoken without words. Then Maria said quietly, deadly calm, if you are with my son, you keep him alive. Tony's mouth went dry. Yes, he whispered. Maria continued, voice shaking now with restrained emotion. And you tell him that I am praying. Every hour, that he is not alone, that he comes home when he can. Tony's eyes burned so hard, he couldn't see the station lights properly. Yes, he whispered again. Maria's voice softened, but it cut deeper. And you tell him that he does not carry the world alone. That is not his job. Tony clenched his jaw until it hurt. He ended the call without speaking again. He lowered the burner phone slowly, as if putting down something sacred. His hands shook. Ruth took the phone from him and slid it into her pocket. Callum watched Tony for a long moment, then looked away again, scanning the station entrance. Tony breathed in, out. His chest felt bruised. That, Tony whispered, was the hardest thing I've ever done. Ruth's voice stayed steady, and it will not be the last. Tony looked at her, eyes raw. So what now? He asked. Ruth nodded toward Tony's backpack. Now you decide what you are, she said, because Eleanor has decided what you are. Tony swallowed. A key. Ruth's eyes held his. A key, she agreed. Or a gatekeeper. Tony's chest tightened. He reached into the backpack and pulled the map out again, unfolding it on his knees. The sealed ring over Scotland remained. Stable, closed, but the bruised pulse in the west was darker now, more urgent, like the ink was thickening. Tony felt the consequence inside him respond. Tugging, wails. Ruth leaned in, studying the marker without touching. That's not just another vault waking, Ruth said quietly. Tony frowned. What is it then? Callum's voice came tight from where he stood. It's a destabilization. A vault reacting to your opening. Like a chain. Tony's stomach dropped. You mean I caused it? Tony whispered. Ruth didn't sugarcoat it. You contributed. The network is balanced. You moved a weight. Other weights shift. Tony's hands clenched around the map. So, because I opened one vault, something else is breaking. Ruth's eyes stayed hard. Yes. That's what the rule means. Closing isn't only about the door behind you. It's about what opening did to everything connected to it. Tony's throat tightened. He stared at the map. Then, faintly, he noticed something new. A tiny symbol near the whale's marker. Not a ring, not an eye. A line, a thin line that looked like a boundary. Tony's thumb throbbed again, as if reacting to the symbol. Ruth noticed Tony's reaction. What? She asked. Tony swallowed. My thumb. It hurts more when I look at that. Ruth's gaze sharpened. Callum stepped closer. That's your authority, Callum said softly. Tony blinked. My what? Ruth's voice went low. The blood seal anchored your trace. The custodian said something else, didn't it? Something about speaking. When balance is threatened, Tony's chest tightened as he remembered. Your seal is not passive. It is an anchor. If forces threaten what you have closed, clear speech can invoke enforcement. Tony swallowed. I can do something? Tony whispered. Callum nodded once. Boundaries. Not power, not control, but boundaries? Tony stared at the map, pulse pounding, and suddenly he understood the shape of the season. The gifts weren't the point. Not yet. The ability to stop was. Tony folded the map carefully, as if folding a responsibility into smaller pieces so he could carry it. Ruth stood. We move, she said. Wales, before Eleanor does. Tony's stomach tightened. Eleanor will be there, Tony asked. Ruth's eyes didn't blink. She'll try. And Vane will keep offering. Tony swallowed, exhausted. I hate him, Tony muttered. Callum's mouth tightened. Good. Hate makes people cautious. Tony looked up sharply. That's not what I want to be. Ruth's eyes held him. Then choose something better, she said. Tony stood, backpack heavy again. He felt the station air, the hum of machines, the ordinary sound of footsteps. Then he felt something else. A sudden cold pressure. The consequence inside him had shifted. Not Wales. Not Eleanor. Up. Tony's gaze lifted instinctively toward the roof beams and fluorescent lights. For half a second, his vision flickered the same way it had earlier in the pub. He saw in his mind's eye the ridge, the warden, still watching. Not close, not present, but aware, measuring. Tony exhaled slowly. Ruth noticed his expression. It's watching again, Tony whispered. Ruth's mouth tightened. Good, she said quietly. Let it watch. Tony blinked. Good. Ruth's gaze stayed steady, because if it's watching, it's waiting for a rule to be broken. Tony's thumb throbbed. A reminder, a warning, a boundary. Tony swallowed and nodded once. Then he followed Ruth and Callum out of the station, into the rain, toward the next pulse on the map, toward Wales, toward a vault he hadn't opened yet, and toward the first real truth of the network. Closing isn't an action, it's a life. As they disappeared down the street, Tony felt the cold weight inside him settle. Patient, watchful, almost satisfied, because Tony had done something today that the vault system cared about more than bravery. He had stopped himself. He had closed a door before it became a disaster, but the map in his bag pulsed again, darker than before. And Tony knew, with a sick certainty, that the next vault wouldn't be content with a phone call and a hard choice. The next vault would demand a payment. Not blood, not money, something deeper. Ruth opened a car door and gestured him in. Tony hesitated, rain soaking his hair. What? Ruth asked. Tony swallowed. If I do this, he said, voice rough, if I keep going, does it ever stop? Ruth looked at him for a long moment. Then she told him the truth. No? Tony stared. Ruth continued, quiet and exact, but you get better at closing. And that's the point. Tony got in. The door shut. And somewhere far above Scotland, on a ridge that didn't belong to this town or this moment, something ancient and unmoving continued to watch, waiting for the next boundary, waiting for Tony to speak it, waiting to see if restraint could hold when the cost finally arrived. End of episode 3. First rule. The map is pulling west. Wales is waiting. And Tony is about to learn that some vaults don't just test what you'll give up. They test what you'll become. This was Storyrun, a cinematic adventure built to be heard. The story continues. If you want to keep running with us, subscribe. And if you know someone who needs a story like this, send it their way. The run continues.